Hey, everyone. In this series, we're going to look at the book of Daniel. And I know many of you are familiar with the book of Daniel. You probably heard the stories of Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Maybe you heard the story of the writing on the wall that spelled doom for King Belshazzar. But do you know how those stories got started? Do you know what was happening in the world when these events took place? Do you know who was in charge then? If you guessed the Babylonians, you'd be right. The book of Daniel takes us back to the year 605 BC to the city of Babylon, ancient capital of the Babylonian Empire. That was a mighty impressive city. It was huge, wealthy, powerful. If you wanted to be someone in the ancient world, if you wanted your voice to be heard, you had to be in Babylon. The Jews didn't have things quite so good during this time, though. See, in 605 BC, the Babylonians had just conquered Judah and taken many of them, including the future king, Jehoiakim, captive to Babylon. For the Jews, it was a terrible time. They were far from home. Their future was uncertain. Many of their religious practices were outlawed. Despite all that, there was one thing they could still do. They could pray. But even that didn't last long. One day, Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were caught praying toward Jerusalem. The Babylonians found this very offensive. Here they were, loyal subjects of the great Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, yet they were turned toward another god. So King Nebuchadnezzar summoned them before him. He was furious. "Why did you pray?" he demanded. "Didn't you know that it's against the law? You should have known better than to pray to your God. Now I'm going to punish you severely." So he threw them into the lion's den, figuring that they wouldn't be alive come morning. But when the sun came up the next day, Daniel was still alive. In fact, he'd been through worse. You see, Daniel had already survived an attempt on his life in a furnace. When King Darius issued a decree that no one should pray to any god but him for 30 days, Daniel continued to pray as he always had. And as a result, he was thrown into a furnace that had been heated 7 times hotter than normal. Yet somehow, he survived unscathed. These stories, like the one about Daniel in the lion's den, show us something very important about our God. No matter what trouble we find ourselves in, no matter what seemingly insurmountable odds we face, we can trust that God will deliver us if we put our faith in Him. That's never been more evident than in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow down to a golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They knew that the God they served was much bigger than any king or emperor, and when push came to shove, they proved it. The book of Daniel is full of stories like this. It's a powerful testament to what God can do when people put their faith in Him. It's a reminder that no matter what troubles we face, no matter what impossible situations we find ourselves in, we can trust that God will be with us if we put our faith in Him. Over the next few weeks, we'll explore those stories further. We'll see how they began and what led up to them. And most importantly, we'll learn how we can apply these lessons to our lives today. I invite you to join me on this journey as we discover the amazing things God can do when we put our faith in Him. Before we dig into this amazing book, let me ask you a question. How has God delivered you when no one else could? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear about the ways God has worked in your life. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. In this series, we're going to explore stories from the Bible that have the exact same name as one of the main characters. And today, we're going to look at the story of Daniel taken to Babylon. So let's dive into it. Now, if you've ever read or heard the story before, then you'll know that the book of Daniel starts with the Israelites being taken into exile in the land of Babylon. And the reason they were taken there was because they had been disobedient to the laws that God had given them. And so God allowed another nation to come and conquer their land and take them away as captives. And as we read in chapter 1, verse 2, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, besieged and took Jerusalem and burnt it down. Then he took the Israelites away captive to Babylon. But it wasn't just the people that were taken away. It was also some of the elite of the nation. And this group included Daniel and his 3 friends, who were taken to be trained in the Babylonian culture and language so that they could serve in the king's court. And it would seem that the king thought this was a great idea because he gained 4 very smart and capable advisors who could help him rule over the empire. But Daniel and his friends didn't necessarily think that this was a good thing, because they were loyal to God, and serving the king of Babylon was not something that they really wanted to do. Now, once Daniel and his friends arrived in Babylon, they were given new names by the Babylonians. So Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. And I can only imagine that they did this to make it harder for the Israelite spies to communicate with each other. And as part of their training, they were fed the food that was provided by the king's table, which was full of delicious foods and wine. But Daniel wasn't impressed by all of this, and when the food arrived, he asked the official in charge to allow him to test what they were being fed. And this was probably to see if it was clean, according to Jewish dietary laws. Now, in chapter 1, verse 8, we read, Daniel said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over him, "Please test me for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink, and let us abstain from the king's rich food and wine. Then let our appearance and our body weight be examined by you at the end of the 10 days, and compare us with the young men who eat the king's food, and let your servants be our attendants." And after the 10 days were over, it was clear that Daniel and his friends were much healthier than the others who had been eating the king's food. And this was because they hadn't eaten anything that was unclean, and they were still committed to obeying God's laws. Now, I think that this is an important lesson for us today because sometimes we might feel like we need to compromise our beliefs in order to fit in or to get ahead, like maybe you're at school or at work. But Daniel and his friends showed that if you stay true to what you believe in, even when it's hard, then God will honor you for it. And I think that's what happened in this situation because shortly after this, Daniel had a vision from God that helped him interpret a mysterious dream that Nebuchadnezzar had had. And because Daniel was able to interpret the dream correctly, the king promoted him to the position of chief administrator over all the affairs of the kingdom. And so, although Daniel and his friends were taken to Babylon against their will, they made the best of the situation and they stayed faithful to God. And in doing so, they were able to bring glory to his name. And that's why we say that Daniel was taken to Babylon. So that's it for today, guys. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Taken 2. If you did, please leave us a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. Friends, we are continuing our series on heroes of the faith from the book of Daniel, and we come now to chapter 1, verse 8. And this is Daniel's test. This is where it all started for Daniel, where he became famous for his integrity. So King Nebuchadnezzar has conquered Jerusalem, and he's brought back to Babylon the elite, the intellectuals, the politicians, the decision-makers of Judah. And he's given them positions in his palace, and he's given them the finest food and the finest wine. But there was one young man who refused to participate, and that is our friend Daniel. Now, what happened? Well, in verse 8, it says that Daniel said to the official in charge of these matters, "I will not defile myself by eating the king's food and drinking his wine. I will only eat vegetables and fruit." Now, you might say that's pretty dramatic, but it wasn't just any food. It was food that was sacrificed to idols. Now, picture the scene. You're in a palace. You have fine linen and gold and silver. You have couches and banquets and beautiful dishes, and you have all of your friends around you saying, "Come on, join us, eat, drink, be merry, enjoy yourself." And this young man, Daniel, refused. He said, "No, thank you. That food has been sacrificed to other gods. I can't eat it. I will only eat vegetables and fruit." Why did he do this? Well, let's go to Daniel, chapter 6, verse 10. Daniel made up his mind about this before he went into the palace. It says that Daniel resolved in his heart that he would not defile himself with the food and wine of the king, and that he would behave as he had in his own country. So this was a young man who had integrity. He didn't compromise his convictions for anything or anyone. In fact, when Daniel's friends heard what he had done, they were so proud of him. It says in chapter 6 that they approved of what he had done. So why should we be like Daniel? Why should we have integrity? Because if you have integrity, you're consistent. You're consistent in your walk with the Lord. You don't change your convictions for anyone or anything. You see, when people hire you, they're hiring your character. They're hiring your integrity. They're hiring your reputation. They're hiring who you are, not necessarily what you can do. So if you have integrity, if you have that inner strength, that inner resolve, then when people hire you, they know they're getting the real deal. They know that you won't compromise. They know that you won't cave in. They know that you wouldn't just give up on your convictions for the sake of popularity or for the sake of profit. So Daniel, by refusing to eat the king's food, showed everyone who he really was. He showed them that he was a man of God. He showed them that he was a man with integrity. Now, what about us? Are we men and women of integrity? Are we men and women who have that inner strength, that inner resolve to say no to sin? Or are we like the people in Judah who compromised their faith and their worship? You see, when Daniel came to Babylon, he took something with him. He took his God. He took his word. He took his prayer life. And those things sustained him through this trial. What about us? Do we take our God with us when we go through the Babylonian situations of life? Do we take our Bible with us? Do we take our prayer closet with us? If we do, then we will have the strength. We will have the resolution. We will have the integrity to stand firm in the midst of pressure. So let's take a stand like Daniel. Let's say no to sin, no to drugs, no to alcohol, no to pornography, no to gossip, no to evil. Let's say no to those things that would cause God to be ashamed of us. Let's take a stand like Daniel. Let's live lives of integrity. Until next time. One of the reasons that God allowed Daniel to go through that fiery furnace was to prepare him for something greater. See, up until that point in Daniel's life, God had given him favor with the king. In chapter 2, verses 49-48, it says that the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and made him chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Now, the reason why God gave Daniel favor with the king is so that when the real test came, which was the fiery furnace, that Daniel would be prepared for it. In other words, you may go through seasons of preparation in your life where things are easy and you're like, God, this is too easy. Why am I going through this? This is just basic stuff. You know, why am I even a Christian? Like, I can barely get through this. Like, what is this you're calling me to? Or maybe you've been a Christian for a long time and you've been serving God, and suddenly you find yourself in a place where things are easy. And you're like, God, this is boring. Like, I wish you would give me something to do, some challenge to meet. Well, both of those types of people need to understand that God is preparing them for something greater. Now, it's not always a greater physical challenge. Sometimes God will allow us to walk through easy times so that we can be prepared for a greater spiritual challenge. For example, sometimes when people get married, they think that marriage is going to be this party every day. And there's nothing wrong with parties, but they think that marriage is just going to be this fun time, right? But very few people realize that marriage is actually a spiritual institution. And so, when you go through that easy season of dating, God is actually preparing you for that greater spiritual challenge of working out a relationship. You know, when the honeymoon's over and now you got bills to pay and kids to raise and stuff like that. So God allows us to walk through these easy seasons so that we can be prepared for the more difficult times. So, if you're going through a hard time right now, just remember that God is preparing you for something greater. He's strengthening you for something greater. And don't resist the process because you think you're not being prepared for anything greater. Maybe you're not seeing it right now, but trust the Lord that He is getting you ready for something that's going to be an open door that you could never open on your own. The second thing that we see that helped Daniel to pass that test was that Daniel was blameless. In chapter 6, verse 20, it says this, Daniel was blameless, and no one could find any fault in him, so they could not find any charge to bring against him. In other words, Daniel was the kind of guy that if somebody was trying to find dirt on him, they couldn't find anything. He was that good. Now, the original word for blameless actually means without spot or blemish. And the idea is that if you were to look at Daniel from head to toe, there was no spot, there was no blemish. He was perfect. You know, I've known people in my life that were so full of themselves, so arrogant, that I knew that they were going to fall. And then, sure enough, they did. But Daniel was the kind of person who didn't have any arrogance. He was so humble, and he was so humble that it says that his accusers actually became his accusers. They were trying to find something wrong with him so that they could accuse him and take him to King Darius. But they couldn't find anything wrong with him because Daniel was so humble, so blameless, so pure in his walk with God. Friends, if you want to pass the test that God is going to allow you to go through, you must make sure that you are blameless, that you are pure in your walk with God. And that means that you can't have any secret sin in your life. There's no room for secret sin, friends. If you've watched my other videos on overcoming pornography addiction, or whatever other kind of secret sin that you might be struggling with, make sure that you get rid of that today. Make sure you deal with that today, because you don't know when God's going to allow a test to come your way. And if you're not blameless, if you're not pure, then that enemy can use that against you. So you must make sure that you live a pure life. Well said, friends. I hope this video has challenged you and encouraged you. Remember, God's favor will come upon you if you'll seek God first, and number 2, remember that God's favor comes with tests and trials. But don't resist the testing, because it's only there to help you and prepare you for something greater. And number 3, if you really want God's favor in your life, live a pure life. Live a life that's free from secret sin. Have you ever had a dream that seemed so real that when you woke up, you weren't sure if what you just experienced was a dream or your new reality? Dreams can be powerful, mysterious, and thought-provoking experiences. They can take us to places and situations we might never encounter in our waking lives. Sometimes they can even offer glimpses into our subconscious minds. In today's video, we're going to explore the story of a man named Daniel who rose to great heights in Babylon because of his ability to interpret dreams. Daniel was a young Jewish man living in the ancient city of Babylon during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. When the king had a disturbing dream that he couldn't remember, he summoned Daniel, one of the Jewish exiles in Babylon, to interpret it. Daniel prayed for help in interpreting the dream and was able to not only tell the king what it meant, but also what would happen in the future. Impressed by Daniel's wisdom and insight, Nebuchadnezzar made him an official in his palace. But Daniel's story doesn't end there. He continued to rise in the ranks of the Babylonian government until he became one of the most influential advisors to the king. So, how did this young Jewish man from Jerusalem become such a prominent figure in the Babylonian Empire? What lessons can we learn from his story? And what does it mean for us today? Join us as we delve into the fascinating account of Daniel's journey to influence. The ability to interpret dreams is a highly sought-after skill, especially in times when people are uncertain about the future or feel lost. It can be a way to gain insight into one's subconscious mind and to understand the messages that the universe may be sending. However, it's important to note that dream interpretation is subjective and there is no one right way to do it. Different cultures and individuals may have different beliefs and techniques when it comes to interpreting dreams. One way to approach dream interpretation is through symbolism. Certain objects, images, and scenarios may hold personal significance for the dreamer and can offer clues to the meaning of the dream. For example, a recurring dream of being chased could symbolize feelings of anxiety or the need to escape a situation in your waking life. Similarly, a dream of flying may represent a sense of freedom or empowerment. Another approach to dream interpretation is through the use of a dream journal. By keeping a record of your dreams and the emotions you experience in them, you may begin to notice patterns or themes that can provide insight into your subconscious mind. This can be a helpful tool for self-reflection and personal growth. It's important to remember that not all dreams require interpretation. Sometimes dreams are simply a reflection of our daily thoughts and experiences. However, if a dream is particularly vivid or disturbing and continues to replay in your mind, it may be worth exploring further through interpretation. While Daniel's ability to interpret dreams was a significant factor in his rise to power, it wasn't the only one. He was also known for his wisdom and insight, which he used to guide King Nebuchadnezzar and other leaders of Babylon. Daniel's wisdom is evident in his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of Babylon and maintain his own religious and cultural identity despite the challenges he faced. He was able to build relationships with key figures in the kingdom and stay true to his beliefs, which ultimately led to his success. In addition to his wisdom and dream interpretation skills, Daniel was also a man of integrity and courage. He was honest and forthright in his dealings with others and was not afraid to speak out against injustice or wrongdoing. These qualities made him a respected and trusted advisor to the king and helped him to rise to the highest levels of power. Daniel was a high official in a certain kingdom. Now, Daniel pleased God and excelled in his work, and the king noticed it and promoted him to be over all the affairs of the kingdom. And he had access even to the king's wife. And the king put him in charge of everything that pertained to the kingdom. Now, this made the other officials jealous. You know, the ones who were there first before Daniel came along. So they started thinking, we have lost our position to this guy Daniel because he knows how to please the king. But let's see if he also knows how to please God. They went to see the king and said, "Hey, King Darius, we have seen how you have promoted Daniel. You've given him all these responsibilities. Look, you've put him in charge of everything. Why are you doing this? What has he done for you to trust him so much?" The king was surprised by their question. He didn't understand what they were trying to do, but these officials kept bothering him day after day, asking him to remove Daniel from his position. "You don't trust us anymore. Why did you make him the head of everything? Why did you give him all the important positions? Take them away from him and give them back to us." They kept asking the king to do this. Now, at first, the king didn't pay attention to what they were saying. He thought these guys are just jealous of Daniel. But then they kept coming back again and again, asking the same thing, and finally the king got annoyed. And when the king got annoyed, he summoned Daniel and said, "Why haven't you been able to control these people? Why can't you get them on your side? They keep complaining about you to me every day. I am getting really tired of listening to their complaints. So you need to do something about it, Daniel. Make these people like you, or else get out of your position." So Daniel did something very smart. He said, "Let me talk to them, Your Majesty. Just give me a chance and I will make sure these people will never complain about me to you again." The king said, "Okay, do it." And Daniel came up with a plan. He went to those officials and asked them, "What's going on? Why are you upset?" They told him everything. Daniel listened to them and then said, "I understand what your problem is. You want more power, right? You think you deserve more power than this, but you are not willing to work hard. You want the same power and position as mine, but you don't want to do what I do. You don't want to work hard. You don't want to do the things that I do to make the king happy. You don't want to do the things that I do to please God. If you want the results, you must be willing to do the work. If you want the position, you must be willing to work hard to get it. Stop complaining about me and go do something great to get the king's attention. Then he will promote you too." They felt ashamed and left. From that day on, Daniel gained their respect and none of them ever complained about him to the king again. Okay, so this is the story of how King Darius got tricked into signing a law forbidding people from praying to anyone but him. See, Darius was a Median king who ruled over the empire of Media. And back then, back in the 6th century BC, there were two ways you could become king of an empire. You could either be the son of the previous king, in which case you'd rule over all the land your dad had conquered, or you could conquer your own land and establish a new empire. But Darius didn't do things the way everyone else did them. He was sneaky. Instead of conquering his brother's kingdom after their father died, Darius made a deal with him. He said that he and his brother would rule together as co-regents, and that sounded like a great idea. But Darius also knew that he'd eventually kick his brother out and take the whole empire for himself. And sure enough, 10 years later, he did exactly that, even though he'd sworn an oath to never do anything of the sort. And not only did he kick his brother out, he also put him to death. Now, Darius was known throughout the empire as a really cruel guy. So after he murdered his brother, he figured that everyone would hate him, so no one would want to rebel against him. But to his surprise, a bunch of people did rebel against him. And when he put them to death too, that inspired even more people to try and kill him. And Darius was like, "Oh man, I have to do something about this." And his advisors were like, "Well, obviously you should just murder everyone who opposes you." But Darius was like, "Nah, that's not going to work because there are a lot of people in my empire and there's only so many ways I can have them put to death." And his advisors were like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And Darius was like, "I don't know. Do you guys have like a magic lamp or something I could rub so a genie would come out and do all the work for me?" And his advisors were like, "We actually do have a magic lamp and it's called Mene and she lives in the temple of the moon goddess." And Darius was like, "Wait, where did you get a magic lamp?" And they were like, "We got it from that old lame hermit, Otanis." And Darius was like, "Ooh, I bet she'll make all my problems go away." So he went to see her. And when he got to her temple, he was like, "Hey, old lady, where's the genie?" And she was like, "What genie?" And he was like, "You know, the one that's gonna come out and help me whenever I rub it." And she was like, "Oh, you mean Manat? She's not a genie. She's a goddess." And Darius was like, "Cool. Well, can I still rub her?" And she was like, "No. Oh, and also, like, you need to build me a giant statue in the temple." And Darius was like, "Ugh, fine. Whatever. But once you're done, you gotta come help me out." And she was like, "Deal." Now, building a statue turned out to be harder than Darius thought it would be, so he set a deadline for it, and told everyone that if they didn't finish it by then, they'd get put to death. And that really motivated the workers to get it done, especially since most of them were secretly plotting to kill Darius and replace him with his son. So, once the statue was finished, they all showed up to Darius and were like, "Hey, look, no more rebels." And Darius was like, "Yeah, but I need you guys to do one more thing for me. I need you to trick all the people in the empire into thinking that I'm a god." And they were like, what?" And he explained that if people thought he was a god, then they wouldn't try to kill him anymore. So they agreed to help him out. And first, they went to the people's homes and were like, "Hey, if you want this king to stop being so mean, then you gotta pray to him every day." Then they went to the markets and were like, "Hey, if you want these pomegranates to not rot before you get home, then you gotta pray to the king." And at the same time, Darius had his guys spread. Did you know that one of the main reasons why God allowed Israel to be taken into exile was because of their lack of prayer? But there was one man who didn't stop praying for his people, even when he knew it would cost him his life. And so today, we're going to look at this man's unshakable faith, how it impacted those around him, and how we can apply it to our own lives. So let's get into the Word. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. When Daniel learned that the king had issued this decree, he went home and had his 3 sons and his friends brought in. Then Daniel said, "Tell the king's officials to have me brought before him. If they find anything in my mouth, that is, if they find anything in my mouth contrary to the laws of the Medes and Persians, any law the king has signed, let them kill me. But if they find nothing, let it be understood that no force on earth or in heaven can make me stop praying to my God." So here we see Daniel preparing for his upcoming trial with King Darius. You see, Daniel continued to pray 3 times a day, even though he knew that the penalty for doing so was your life. And I think this is important to note here because sometimes we think that the reason why Daniel wasn't killed right away was because he was a good person. But that's not the case. In fact, Daniel chapter 6 verse 9, it says, "This continued until the reign of King Darius the Mede." The very thought of these decrees made him tremble, so he decided to follow them. So even the king was afraid to go against the Jewish people and what they wanted. But what's amazing here is that Daniel wasn't afraid either. And so he calls for his 3 sons and his friends and tells them, "Hey, listen, if I am killed, don't mourn for me. Don't grieve for me, because I'm about to die for my faith." And I think this shows us that Daniel was ready to lay down his life for his faith. And so Daniel then goes and stands before the king and reminds the king of the law that once they bring you before the king and you find anything in your mouth that is contrary to the laws of the Medes and Persians, then you can kill me. And Daniel says, "Great, I agree to that. But if you don't find anything in my mouth that is contrary to your laws, then just let me live." So Daniel basically gave up his life for his faith. He was like, "Okay, if you kill me, I'm giving up my life for my faith. But if you don't kill me, then I will continue to serve my God." Now, I want you to picture this. Daniel had 3 sons. So this means that if he died, his sons would become fatherless and they wouldn't have anybody to protect them. And this is the kind of faith that Daniel had. And this is the kind of faith that we should have. We should be willing to give up our life for our faith. So many times we hear about Christians who are being persecuted for their faith in Jesus, and I think about those people who are willing to give up their life for their faith. And I ask myself the question, would I be willing to do the same? Would I be willing to give up my life for my faith in Jesus? And that's the kind of faith that we need to strive for. That's the kind of faith that we need to increase in. And I want to close by saying that Daniel was rewarded for his faithfulness. God did not forget about him. And oftentimes when we read about Daniel, we remember him for predicting the future, for interpreting dreams, for being a wise man. But I want to challenge you to remember him for something else, for his unwavering faith, for his steadfast commitment to prayer, for his willingness to lay down his life for his faith. Daniel is a man after God's own heart, and so should we be men and women after God's own heart as well. And with that said, I hope that you enjoyed this message. If you did, make sure to hit the like button below and share this with someone who needs to hear this. I also invite you to subscribe for more messages like this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Last time we saw Daniel, he was released from prison, and then shortly thereafter promoted over all of the wise men and the astrologers of Babylon. But now it seems like Daniel is in some hot water. How did this happen? Let's read the passage and find out. Daniel chapter 6, verse 2. Then those who were envious of Daniel among his fellow officials set out to find a basis for complaint against him. They sought to find an offense or any fault in his conduct in matters of the law, religion, or civil government, intending to bring charges against him before the king. And so these guys are looking to accuse Daniel of something, but they can't really think of anything. So what they do is they go look in the law. Maybe there's something in the law that Daniel has broken, and if they can't find anything there, maybe he's done something wrong with one of his religious practices. And still they come up empty-handed. Finally they go, Well, maybe he's been disobedient in some way to the king or to the government. But they couldn't find a thing. So what do? Well, finally, they find something. Verse 7. And these men said to one another, "We will not find any cause for complaint against this man in matters of the law, or religion, or civil government. We will never find any reason in him for the king to have him put to death. But we can find a cause for serious complaint, for it has been made a law by Darius that within 30 days no one may make any request of any god or man except the king." Now Daniel, since they established this law, has made it a habit to pray on his knees 3 times a day, and he prays and gives thanks before the God of heaven. So what did they find? Well, Daniel was praying 3 times a day, and apparently that was a problem, because King Darius had issued a decree that nobody was allowed to pray to anyone other than the king for 30 days. So basically, Daniel was still praying to God, and that was a violation of the king's law. Now, I want you to notice a couple things here. First, the accusers were envious of Daniel. It says right there in verse 2, "Those who were envious of Daniel among his fellow officials set out to find a basis for complaint against him." They were envious of Daniel. Why would they be envious of Daniel? Well, first of all, he was God's man. He was a man of integrity. He didn't compromise. He refused to bow to the images. He refused to eat the king's food. And ultimately, God elevated him above all of the wise men and the sorcerers and the magicians of Babylon. And so that caused the officials to be envious of Daniel. Secondly, it says that these officials were seeking to find something, some basis for complaint. What does that tell us? That sometimes we can be so focused on finding something wrong with someone else that we miss what God is doing in their life. And I think that's exactly what happened here. These guys were so busy trying to find something wrong with Daniel and take him down that they didn't realize that Daniel was just a man of prayer. And this is God's man that God has used in mighty ways to bring about his purposes. Look at verse 10. It says, "So when they had found this thing, they came and accused the Daniel to the king, and said, 'Thus did you enact that law concerning the gods and the decree that no one should pray to any god or man for 30 days except yourself, O king?' So they came, and they said to the king, 'You enacted this law, right? And Daniel's broken it.'" Let's remember a few lessons as we close. First, don't envy the godly people of God. Second, don't be so focused on someone else's faults that you miss what God is doing in their life. And third, don't bring accusations before the king. Bring them to the person and try to resolve the matter there. If you have a difference with someone, take it to them directly. Don't gossip, don't slander, don't accuse, don't participate in character assassination. Instead, be a person of integrity. Pray for the person, love the person, and seek reconciliation. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I hope this blessed you. Until next time, be blessed. Why is King Darius so upset? He's pacing back and forth in his royal court, back and forth, back and forth. His counselors are gathered around him. One of them is the royal priest, another is the treasurer, and the third is the commander of the royal guard. They all look very worried because their usually jovial king is in a terrible mood. Darius throws his hands up in the air. He says, "Oh, that wicked Haman! How could I have been so blind as to trust him?" The treasurer says, "Your Majesty, please calm down. Surely there's some way out of this." But Darius says, No, there's no way out. I've looked everywhere for a loophole, but I can't find one. My own decree has gone against me. How could this have happened?" Now you may be asking, what did King Darius do? What did he decree? Well, let's go back a few days. King Darius was having a big problem. One of his counselors was being disrespectful, and it was getting on his nerves. So he decided to have an audience with that counselor and see what he could do about it. When the counselor came into the court, Darius said to him, "You have something that belongs to me, and I want it." And the counselor said, "Your Majesty, I don't know what you're talking about." Then Darius said, "I want your head." That's when the counselor realized that the king wanted his head on a platter, and he quickly tried to make a bargain with the king. He said, "Your Majesty, if I am to die, then who will be the one to trim your beard? You know, you have a royal decree that only I am allowed to trim your beard." Darius thought about it. He did have a royal decree that only this guy could trim his beard, and he liked to get his beard trimmed every day. What would he do without his royal barber? So Darius said, "All right, I won't kill you today, but tomorrow you must get me a very special delivery. I want the finest barber in the world to come to my court, and I want him to bring his barber pole with him." The counselor said, "Yes, Your Majesty, I will get you the finest barber in the world." And he bowed and left the court. The next day, the counselor came to the king and said, "Your Majesty, here is the finest barber in the world. He comes from a faraway land. He traveled across the sea to get here. He's the best barber in the world, and this is his barber pole." Darius looked at the barber pole and said, "You didn't get me the barber pole that I asked for." And the counselor said, "Your Majesty, this is the barber pole that you asked for." Darius said, "No, you didn't understand. I asked for the barber pole that goes up and down, not this silly barber pole that just stands there." The counselor was shocked. He didn't know that the king wanted a barber pole that went up and down. He thought the barber pole that stood straight up was the one that he wanted. But how could he have possibly known that? And so the counselor said, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. If you want a barber pole that goes up and down, then I must send for the greatest inventor in the world so he can make you one." Darius said, "That's exactly what I want. Get the greatest inventor in the world." And so the counselor did. He sent word to a faraway land, and the greatest inventor in the world came running. He bowed before the king and said, "Your Majesty, how can I help you?" And Darius told him, "I need a barber pole. I want one that goes up and down like this." The inventor looked at it and said, "My king, this is an impossible task. It's against the laws of physics. A barber pole cannot go up and down." Darius said, "If you can't do it, then you're not the greatest inventor in the world." The inventor said, "Your Majesty, I'm telling the truth. I am not the greatest inventor in the world. There is a man in a faraway land who is greater than I am. He lives in a little village, and if you want the barber pole that goes up and down, then you must go to him." So Darius said, "Very well, take me to him." Now, the whole time, the counselor was thinking to himself, have you ever trusted God completely? Not like when everything is going well and you can see how God is moving, but when your back is against the wall and it looks like there is no way out. Have you ever been in that kind of situation where it looked like God was silent and you had to trust Him anyway? In the Bible, the book of Daniel, chapter 6, tells the story of a man called Daniel who found himself in the most terrifying situation imaginable. He was thrown into a den of hungry lions, and yet he trusted God completely. And when you read this passage, it's very clear that Daniel wasn't some reckless optimist who just put his trust in God and didn't think about the consequences. No. Daniel was a man who knew what it meant to serve God and knew what would happen if he didn't. Daniel was a man of prayer. He had a consistent prayer life. In fact, in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, it says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was written, he went home. And as he now knew what the king had commanded, he told Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, servants of the living God, to come to agreement with him to ask for mercy from the God of their fathers for 3 weeks, to eat no delicacies, to bow themselves down, or worship any god or any man whom they had not known." So Daniel was a man who prayed consistently, persistently. He prayed without ceasing. And so when he was thrown into the lion's den, Daniel was a man who knew that God could save him. But notice also that Daniel wasn't praying for himself alone. He was praying for his 3 friends. He was praying for his community. He was praying for the people of God. And in the same way, we should be praying for those around us, even when we find ourselves in difficult situations. And what's interesting is that verse 11 tells us why Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. It says, "Then they came near the mouth of the den, And the king commanded that the doors be made fast. And while he yet lived, he gave the command that stones be brought and a millstone and mortar, and that the mouth of the den be sealed. So basically, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den because he wouldn't compromise his faith. He wouldn't worship the king. And so often when we're serving God, we'll find ourselves in difficult situations. We'll find ourselves being tempted to compromise. And if we don't hold fast to our faith, we may find ourselves in a situation like Daniel. But Daniel was a man who held fast to his faith right till the end. Now, imagine for a moment the scene. You have a man in his 60s being thrown into a den of hungry lions. I mean, what went through his mind? Was he afraid? Of course he was afraid. But notice that despite all of the noise and commotion, in verse 18, it says, "Then the king arose in his wrath and commanded that Daniel be brought before him. And the men were sent to open the den. And the king asked Daniel, saying, 'Was your God able to deliver you?'" So, amid all of the chaos, amidst all of the trouble, Daniel maintained his composure. And when the king came to him and asked him that mocking question, "Was your God able to deliver you?" what was Daniel's response? Verse 23, "Then Daniel said to the king, 'O my God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths that I should not be destroyed before you.'" That's amazing. So let me ask you this. Are you going through a difficult time right now? Are you facing a giant in your life? Maybe it's an addiction, or maybe it's a sin that you need to stop doing. Whatever it is that's holding you captive, whatever it is that you need deliverance from, I want to encourage you to trust in God, believe in God, because God can deliver you. As we close, I've been struck, I'm sure that you've heard this story before. King Darius made a decree that for 30 days no one was to pray to any god or man except him. And if they did, they were going to be thrown into a den of lions. Now, Daniel continued to pray in his home 3 times a day, and the windows were open. And so it happened that the king received an accusation against Daniel that he was praying to his God. So he had to be brought before the king. And the king, upon hearing that Daniel had broken the law, commanded that he be thrown into a den of lions, and that was in the evening time. And then the king went and slept. Now what happens after that? You would think that Daniel is in the den of lions and the lions have eaten him up. But you see, there are some details in the text that show us that God protected Daniel in a very miraculous way. Let me just read these verses again. It says here, "Then the king commanded that Daniel be taken and cast into a den of lions, and the king said to Daniel, 'You have been found guilty, and your plea has been established. And my decree is that you shall be cut in pieces, and the lions shall have dominion over you.' Then Daniel said, 'Thanks be to God who has not rejected my prayer, and he has sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions. See, I have been with them all night, and have slept in the midst of lions, whose mouths the king has commanded to be shut. If these men have been killed with me, and my body has not been found in the den, let my God please be merciful to me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of your hands, O king, for I have not done any wrong before you." Now, look at the words of Daniel, because many people have misunderstood what Daniel said here. Daniel did not say that the angel shut the mouth of the lions. He only said that his God had sent an angel, and that is correct. Angels don't have mouths. Only people have mouths. And so some people say, the angel could have shut his own mouth and not make a sound, and that would have been great. But Daniel didn't say that. Daniel said that God sent an angel, which means that God is the one who did it. He sent an agent to do it. Just like when we send our children out to go buy something from the store, we send an agent. We don't say, "Hey son, go to the store and you be the groceries." No, we send them as our agent to go and do a specific job. Likewise, God sent an angel as his agent to do a specific job. And so, when we look at this passage, we can see that God is the one who shut the mouth of the lions, not the angel. That is why Daniel gives God the glory in this passage. And we need to pay attention to this detail, because this shows us the greatness of God, that he is the one who protected Daniel all night long. Some people might say, If God could protect Daniel in the lion's den, why can't he heal my sick body? Why can't he give me a new car? Why can't he help me in this situation? Look, God can do whatever he wants to do, and he can protect us in difficult situations, as he protected Daniel. But sometimes he doesn't do that. Sometimes he allows those trials to come into our lives because he wants us to trust him more, to depend on him more, to seek him more, to pray more. And this is what happened with Daniel. Daniel was someone who prayed regularly. He prayed 3 times a day, and even though he was in a difficult situation, he still trusted. When Daniel was found in the lion's den, the king couldn't contain his happiness. He was so overjoyed that his friend was unharmed that he did something very unusual. Let me explain. So, the night before, King Darius had a dream, and it troubled him greatly, and he sent for Daniel, his wise friend, to interpret it for him. But Daniel was so busy that he didn't get to see the king right away. So the king got really angry and ordered that Daniel be thrown into a den of hungry lions. And then the king went home, probably to get some sleep after a busy day of, throwing people into lion dens. It's hard work being a king. Anyway, the next morning the king got up early, most likely because he couldn't sleep with all those lions roaring outside of his bedroom, and he went down to the den to check on Daniel. And the king was so relieved to find that Daniel was alive and well, that he did something very out of character for him. Let me set the scene for you. It says here that early in the morning, the king got up and hurried to the den. Then he cried out at the sight of Daniel. Now, if you remember, the last time we saw Daniel, he was in the lion's den. And this is what the lion's den looked like. It was a large stone structure built by King Nebuchadnezzar, the previous king, for his son, Evil Merodach, to play in. The sides and roof were so high that they were smooth, making it impossible to climb out. And there were grates in the roof to allow light and air into the structure. Now, imagine the scene. The king is standing at the entrance to the lion's den. On one side are his guards who have their spears ready just in case. And on the other side is Daniel, who has spent a whole night in this small space with 4 sides full of hungry lions. And what does the king do? He runs to Daniel and he hugs him. The text says that the king threw his arms around Daniel and hugged him. Can you imagine it? The king, who just yesterday had ordered that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den, now is hugging him as if they are best friends. I can just picture it. The guards are gaping at their king, wondering what he's doing, while the king is just so overcome with joy that Daniel is okay that he can't help himself. I think this teaches us a couple of important lessons. First of all, it shows us that even kings make mistakes. I mean, let's face it, Darius wasn't really a bad guy. He just made one really bad decision. I think sometimes we can be so quick to judge others, but we should remember that everyone makes mistakes, even kings. But secondly, it shows us that it's okay to be happy. I mean, look at the king. He was so happy that Daniel was okay that he couldn't help himself. And you know what? That's a good thing. The Bible tells us to rejoice always. And the king was so happy that he was actually able to keep a straight face. Sometimes when someone is happy, they might break into a big smile or laugh out loud or even shed tears of joy. And that's okay. The Bible tells us that a joyful heart does good, like medicine. So let's learn from the king and not be afraid to show our joy. Of course, there's a time and a place for everything. And the king probably didn't want to make a fool of himself in front of his guards. So maybe he saved his biggest smile for when he got back to the palace. But you get my point. It's okay to be happy. In fact, it's good for us. And you know what else is good for us? God. The Bible, what happened to the people who accused Daniel's God of being a demon? Daniel was a man who wholeheartedly served the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He did not compromise even when faced with death. There were times when he was thrown into the lion's den because of his unwavering commitment to God. Miraculously, he survived unscathed. Another time he was thrown into prison for 64 days because he wouldn't bow down to an image made by King Darius. But there was one accusation that hurt him deeply. It was an accusation from his very close friends. They said that the God whom he worships is a demon. In this video, you will see what happened to those who fought against the God of Daniel. Stay tuned till the end. It is well known that the God of Israel is a jealous God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name is Yahweh, is a jealous God. Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt where you were a slave, am jealous in your midst. When the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they made an idol calf while Moses was on Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments. And God was so angry that he destroyed the 10 Commandments that Moses had received. So if the God of Israel is jealous, how much more should we fear his wrath if we accuse him of being a demon? Now let's get back to our main story. In the book of Daniel, chapter 3, verses 1 to 7, it says, "A command went out from the king's mouth, and all the people were commanded throughout the kingdom, saying, 'It is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and all music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that I have made. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace.'" The prophet Daniel, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, heard about this wicked decree from the king. So they decided to pray 3 times a day, just like they always did. They prayed toward Jerusalem with the windows open toward the temple in Jerusalem, asking God to have mercy on them. Now, someone saw them praying like this and immediately ran to the king and said, "Look, I saw these men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who you let not set up an image after your gods. They are praying toward Jerusalem 3 times a day." The king was furious. He sent for them and said, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image that I have made? And at the same time, whoever hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and all music, falls down and worships the gold image which I have made? Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." They answered and said to the king, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning, fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. If Hezekiah, Hananiah, and Mishael, our friends, are cast into the fiery furnace, we will not bow down to your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." The king became very angry and commanded that they be cast into the burning, fiery furnace. Then the furnace was heated 7 times hotter than it was before. And some men like Felix and others were thrown into the burning, fiery furnace because they worshipped the God of Daniel. Now, when these men were thrown into the furnace, they all praised God. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For glory and majesty, greatness and power belong to him, and he will have dominion and everlasting power, generation after generation. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. The king commanded that they be brought before him. And when they came, the multitude cried out and was exceedingly glad to see them alive. He said to them, "Was it not that you decided that you would not bow down to the golden image that I have made? And yet here you are." They replied and said to the king, "We do not worship your gods, and we do not serve your image of gold which you have set up. But the God whom we worship is able to deliver us from you. He sent his angel and delivered us from the furnace." May I conclude with 3 lessons for today. Number 1, never give up when you're doing right. When you are doing what you believe is right, even though it may be difficult, even though it may be costly, never give up. The story of Joseph is a great example of this. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers out of jealousy. He was betrayed by his master's wife when he resisted her sexual advances. He was falsely accused by his master and put in prison. But throughout all of that, Joseph never gave up on what he believed was right, and as a result, he ended up saving an entire nation from starvation. So whenever you are facing opposition or persecution for doing what you know is right, remember the story of Joseph and don't give up. Stay strong in your faith and trust in God's plan for your life. Number 2, trust God to protect you. Sometimes when we are trying to do what is right, we can become fearful and anxious about the consequences. We may worry about what people will say or do, or how we will be treated, but we need to remember that God is with us and He will protect us. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and praise your Father in heaven." Notice the word men in this verse. It means haters. Jesus is saying, let your light shine in such a way that even your haters will see your good works and give glory to God. So, when you are doing right, even if you have haters, don't be afraid because God will protect you. Look at the life of Daniel. He was thrown into the lion's den by King Darius because he continued to pray to God despite the king's orders. But when the king came to Daniel the next morning, he found him unharmed and praised God in the presence of all the nobles and officials. Daniel was not only protected by God, but he was also vindicated and honored in front of everyone. So, whenever you are doing what is right, trust God to protect you. Don't let fear or anxiety stop you from obeying God's word. Number 3, live with integrity in a wicked world. Our final lesson is to remember that not everyone will understand or appreciate what we are doing. We may face ridicule, mockery, or even persecution because of our faith and our values. But we must remain steadfast and unwavering in our commitment to God. In John chapter 15, verse 18 to 19, Jesus said, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you don't belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you." Jesus is telling his disciples that if the world hates them, it's because the world hates him first. They should not expect acceptance or approval from the world because they are not part of it. They are chosen by God and called to live according to His will, even if it goes against the norms or values of the world. So whenever you are doing what is right, remember that you may face opposition from a wicked world. But don't compromise your principles or abandon your faith. Remain faithful to God and trust in His promises to sustain you. So, my friends, these are just 3 quick thoughts on what it means to do what is right. I hope they have been helpful and encouraging to you. Now I want to hear from you. What has been your experience with doing what is right? Has it been easy or difficult for you? Has it brought you joy or suffering? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.